Hello, Esther. I'm very, very pleased that you can join me here today for a virtual fireplace chat that is all centered around your fantastic book, Well at Work.
Thank
I
you so
remember, pleasure. I remember vividly at the beginning of January, I was doing my regular trip to the Austin, Texas Central Library here, beautiful building, by the way, and I saw that your book was absolutely well positioned there. I immediately grabbed it, took it home, and I was amazed about the journey that you've gone through in the world of well-being at work. I was fascinated with the integrative medicine kind of vantage point, and I felt very much validated in my own pursuits and ventures around Workwell Studios. So I'd like to start by thanking you for writing this book, which is so inspiring, and I hope a lot of people will take to it and implement it.
Well, I thank you for this amazing introduction and for your enthusiasm. And I feel very connected to the amazing work you're doing. So it's a mutual admiration society here.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we're not going to stop with this session here. I would like to start by getting a bit more detail on your journey to well-being at work. So therefore, the first question is, what triggered your interest in this field?
Well, I started off as a rheumatologist, an arthritis doc, and I was at the National Institutes of Health, and I had discovered that the brain's stress center, the hypothalamus, is important in susceptibility to autoimmune inflammatory disease in rats. So that was the proof of the science of the mind-body connection. But how do I get from rats and the science of the mind-body connection to built environment and office workers? And it all came from a single question that Kevin Kampshire, the then director of research at the U.S. General Services Administration, asked me when we were at a conference together. And he said, he knew that I was studying stress, and he asked if I could help him measure the impacts of the built office environment that he oversaw. The U.S. General Service Administration is the agency of the federal government that builds, operates, and maintains all non-military federal buildings, your courthouses, your offices, your embassies around the world, your libraries. And he wanted a way to measure the impacts of those spaces on health, well-being, and ultimately performance. And his idea was that if he could measure the stress response, if I could help him to measure the stress response in the people in those spaces, over 1 million office workers and over 374 million square feet of office space, then he would have a prescription for a healthy building. And we began in the year 2000 to work together, and we engaged a collaborator who was at the time at the National Institute on Aging, Julian Thayer, who was a pioneer on heart rate variability, that way that all of your wearable devices uses to measure the stress and relaxation response. And the three of us and our colleagues started working together to measure the stress response in office workers in a building in Denver that was being retrofitted. And the old space had 6-foot-high wall cubicles. It was dark, no views to the outside, no sunlight, dusty, dank, musty, loud mechanical noise. I mean, when I talk to audiences, I ask people how many people have worked in such a space, and lots of people put up their hands, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, and then to my surprise, we published this first study in 2010. To my huge surprise, and I don't know why I was surprised, the people in the new space that was open office design, had lots of sunlight, views to the mountains, great airflow, fresh air turnover, low mechanical noise. The people in those spaces were significantly less stressed on 2 physiological measures of the stress response, heart rate variability and salivary cortisol, than the people in the old spaces. And the people who were less stressed when they went home at night, even while they were sleeping. So to me, it was such a huge eye-opener of how much the space that you spend most of your time and during the day can affect your stress response, your sleep quality, that it really convinced me, it convinced all of us that we need to design our workplaces, our workspaces, to reduce stress and enhance well-being.
Wow, what a finding. And I think a lot of people should be grateful that you guys did that kind of research, because that was the kind of scientific evidence that everybody was waiting for, right?
Yes, I agree. But then I went through a period of extreme stress in my own life, where my mother was dying of breast cancer. I had other stresses in my life, and I developed inflammatory arthritis. And I tell the story in the book, so I won't go into a long story here, but I serendipitously went with friends to Crete, to Greece, and within 2 weeks, I felt much better and I began to heal. And I asked myself, what was I doing there that helped me heal? I was swimming in the ocean every day. I was with friends and neighbors. I was eating a healthy Mediterranean diet. I was to the hill above the village to a tiny little Greek chapel, and I was sitting there listening to the sounds of the birds and the sheep and the goats and looking out at the blue Mediterranean, and I didn't know I was meditating. So I did not know until I came to the Center for Integrative Medicine that I was engaging in the 7 domains of integrative health, and that's what helped heal and kept me resilient. So there were those 2 parallel strains in my life convinced me that it's really important to design spaces to help a person engage in those aspects of integrative health.
When did you actually start the evangelization process of talking to those people in charge of so many people working in various public and private sector kind of environments? When did that start?
When we published that study in 2010, it was very obvious to us that Kevin Kampshire and my colleagues, Julian Thayer and others who had done this quantitative research, that we really had an important finding here that proved that you need to design workspaces to enhance physical health and emotional well-being. But to my surprise, I think to all of our surprise, when we spoke to the C-suite CEOs and chief medical officers and so on, and we did a lot of speaking to those kinds of leadership in different organizations, they were interested. They said, well, you know, that's important. Yeah, of course, health is important, but can we do this? Can we fix the office space for $5,000? No, you can't. You can't do anything with $5,000, basically. But that was the amount of money that was designated to for health and well-being, really. And so it became clear that the health and well-being of office workers was very low on the priority scale of the leadership, who would have to spend a lot of money to create spaces that were healthy, and both physically healthy and emotionally healthy.
What were the critical, I would say, moments, the catalysts, the milestones where you felt like adoption was being taken to the next level?
I think the first milestone was of a glimmer of awareness was during the downturn, the economic downturn that hit the building industry, the construction, the design industry particularly hard back in 2008, 2009. And that's when organizations like the American Institute of Architects began to be aware of the importance of design and health. I remember speaking at an American Institute of Architecture students convention in December of 2009, where the first keynote was a business person and said to this audience of graduating architecture students, and I tell this story in the book, that forget about it, there are no jobs. The Gehry studio has laid off 30% or 50% of its people, and most of them are the young people who are just starting out. So I then had to follow this speaker on the podium, and I jettisoned my remarks, and I went to the front of the stage and I said, you, the design professionals of the future, are our health professionals, partners in the health of this nation. We cannot do it without you. We cannot tell somebody to go back home or to work and exercise if there's no place to move about. We can't tell them to find a place to meditate if there's no place to meditate, and so on. And I got a standing ovation at the beginning of my talk. And that was the beginning. It was a glimmer. And the American Institute of Architecture, the two presidents were in the audience, and they immediately this concept and started the Design and Health Leadership Group to bring health front and center into design of all sorts, not just healthcare design. So what was the next node? COVID. Mm-hmm. No question that the silver lining of COVID is that the importance of the built environment being critical for physical health and emotional well-being came to the forefront. And it was both a bottom-up and a top-down understanding. There was a huge demand. People did not and still do not want to go back to work to an unhealthy workplace. There's a whole cottage industry, I would say, of organizations that label buildings as healthy. Some of these have been around for decades. Living Building Challenge, for example, Weil, which is now part of U.S. Green Building Council that certifies buildings as healthy and well. There's the government. It started with the CDC and the GSA. Fitwell, it's another organization now and a nonprofit that labels buildings as healthy. And, you can look up, there's many, even UL has gotten into the act. Why is that? It's because there's demand from consumers to know that those buildings are healthy. Now, at the beginning of COVID and through COVID, and even now, I would say, the big emphasis was on keeping the air clean. Yeah, true. We know that the virus gets spread through the ventilation. Of course, we've known for decades about Legionnaire's disease. So mold, bacteria, viruses get spread through ventilation systems. So you need to have excellent ventilation, excellent filtration. But what I like to say, and the whole purpose of my evangelizing this, is that far more than physical health. It includes emotional well-being. And if you don't design workspaces to also support integrative health and emotional well-being, you're not going to be able to attract people back to work, and they're not going to stay healthy, because whether you get sick from a virus or any infectious agent depends on three things. It depends on the dose to which you're exposed, the duration of exposure, and your own resilience. And you can mitigate and reduce the dose and duration of exposure with frequent fresh air turnover, excellent ventilation, excellent filtration, masking, distancing. But in order to enhance your resilience, your ability to fight infection when you are exposed to it, and it's not when, we're always exposed to bugs and viruses and bacteria. Yep. So you have to have a way to enhance your resilience.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting lead into the sort of second chapter that we're going to talk about, which is about integrative health and medicine, but the kind of holistic approach which you advocate, and the center, of course, too. But it's safe to say and sad to say that it's taken such a long time, and still is, for business leaders, architects, and even the medical profession to embrace this kind of holistic approach. And I'm sort of wondering sometimes, and a lot of these people are smart, intelligent. Have they just never been educated on these matters, or have they looked away?
So one of the problems is that field has been around for so long. It's something your grandmother told you. And I think in the academic circles, if it's popular in the popular culture, it's dismissed. And the fact is, there wasn't a way to get hard data to prove these points until very recently. So in Western medicine and Western science, unless you can prove it, it isn't real. And there is a lot of, shishi foo-foo, California shishi foo-foo flakiness. There is a lot of that out there, and in order to really bring the leadership on board. We needed
Mhm.
the hard data, which is
Yeah.
why, again, I started working with and continued to work with Kevin Campshire and the GSA for all these decades. I
Mhm.
described the first study we did in 2010, but since coming to the University of Arizona, we continued using state-of-the-art wearable devices to measure the physiological stress response, physical activity,
Mhm.
posture, sleep quality, and also psychological responses,
Mhm.
and using big data analytics to connect those health and well-being responses to up to 11 different environmental attributes that we were collecting in real time. It
Mhm.
took a long time to get that kind of technology
Mhm.
functional, and then the data analytics to be able to put it all together. So it's only very recently that we had the evidence to prove
Mhm.
exactly how these spaces can help or harm.
Would you mind just enumerating the 7 domains that each get a chapter in your book so that people know what the scope is of what you're talking about in the book?
Thank you, thank you. So the 7 domains of integrative health was a concept that was put together the faculty at the Center for Integrative Medicine, Dr. Rocky Crocker, Molly Burke, one of our leads in educational web development, Dr. Andrew Weil, Victoria Mazes. So whole group of faculty at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine said, let's define what are the core areas that one must engage in order to enhance health and well-being. So they are sleep, resilience, which is your stress and relaxation response, environment, which includes love of nature, being in nature, views to nature, and also clean air, healthy temperature and humidity, and relationships, spirituality, and nutrition. My whole thesis of this book, and of my evangelizing, as you call it,
Yeah.
is that if you design your environment where you spend 90%, Americans spend 90% of their time indoors,
Yeah.
most of it at.
Mhm.
So if you design the environment to enhance and facilitate your engaging in each of those domains without even realizing it, you will naturally be more resilient, as opposed to trying to force yourself to go to the gym. If you
Yeah.
have a workspace that has beautiful staircases, for example, that attracts you to climb the stairs
Mhm.
instead of taking the elevator. If you have lots of different spaces to gather, so different size groups can gather, you can form different relationship sizes and groupings. Spaces to go offline and be quiet and meditate. I talk about spirituality, and I don't mean religious spirituality in the book. I mean, what are the spaces that can help you get in the zone, get in flow?
Yeah.
How do you do that? How is that different from meditation? Because it is quite similar, but there's some differences that I talk about. How do you have healthy nutrition at work? At the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, we have a teaching kitchen where Dr. Weil is going to be giving cooking lessons. We also have a beautiful, large, bright, and airy staff lounge that people can do their own cooking for lunch. So if you don't have those affordances, those amenities at work, you cannot engage in those healthy behaviors. And if you have those amenities, it attracts you to engage in them without even realizing it.
At the risk of oversimplifying things, if I would ask you point blank, what are the kind of key pillars that people need to address and keep in balance?
Wow. I mean, all of these, but
I know. Yeah.
well, I think one of the really important ones is light.
Mhm.
Circadian sunlight, bright
Mhm.
morning sunlight.
Mhm.
Between 8 a.m. and 12 noon, there's a tremendous amount of research that shows, and this is actually with another collaborator with the GSA, Mariana Figuero, who's an expert on light and sleep. And she's shown that 4 hours of bright sunlight in the morning enhances your sleep quality. You fall asleep faster. You wake up the next morning in a better mood and less fatigued. And in our studies, we found that people who move more during the day are less stressed when they go home at night, and they have better sleep quality, and they wake up better in a better mood, and they're less fatigued the next day. So if you have light and space to move, and then reducing stress. So what helps to reduce stress? Being in nature, having a place to walk in nature. So again, gentle movement, again, is very important. Exercise is really important for health, but you don't have to get on a treadmill. If you just move more during the day, and through COVID and even up until now, because our new building was still under construction, I've been working from home, and there's no question that I move less when I'm at home. And I go into work, and especially now that we have these beautiful 3 buildings that embody all the 7 domains of integrative health, I definitely move more, and I don't even realize it. It's like, and what we measured in our studies was move up to 1,000 steps more a day if the space is designed appropriately to encourage movement. So your office can be your new gym.
Yeah, exactly. I must confess that for me, progressively, I've discovered that light is far more important than I ever thought. I had discovered the power of nature and the importance of acoustics, which we'll get to in a minute. But light has been my big discovery over the last couple of years. Can we move on to the next chapter, which is the people that I am focusing on, you too, which is knowledge workers. I was fascinated to hear that one of your challenging colleagues, as you were progressing to the second stage in your career, was exactly positioning that as the key question, saying that if the outcome is not a product of a service, but rather knowledge or creativity, then it's a different ballgame altogether. So I'm fascinated about this particular topic.
You're 100% right. So that was the first question that Kevin Kampscher posed to me when I was at NIH. And he said he wanted a way to measure the impact of those built spaces if the output was not widgets, but was a creative product. And the reason he wanted to measure the stress response, and he came to me as an expert in doing that, is that if you're stressed, you're not going to be at full cognitive capacity. You're not going to be able to perform at peak. Now, you need your stress response to perform at peak. It's your stress response that gives you that focus, that vigilance, that ability, that energy to accomplish the task at hand, even if, fight or flight or the task at hand. But if you're too stressed, that's when you get sick. And that's when you have problems like, for example, in the workplace, presenteeism, being there but not functioning well, absenteeism, getting, more days off because you're sick, fatigue, burnout. So the stress response is one way to get at whether those spaces are optimal for your ability to perform. It's kind of that intermediate that tells you whether or not you're in an optimal position. There's a lot of individual variability, of course, depending on the kind of job you do during the day. Even if you're a knowledge worker, you're doing different kinds of things throughout the day. You may need to have heads down work. You may need to be working with colleagues, teaming, and so on. And that's why you need spaces to enhance all of those different kinds of activities, also spaces that optimize work for personalities. In our studies with the GSA, we found that people who were more extroverted preferred open office design where there was lots of movement and activity going on around. Think about people who spend their day working in coffee shops. Those are probably extroverts. And then people who are more introverted prefer quieter, calmer, smaller spaces.
Your book also states at a point in time that virtually every building feature, right, has a potential to be a stressor or a delighter. And maybe you can just tell me on a generic level, which are the things which are the biggest, quote unquote, party poopers and the brightest delighters? Yeah.
Well, first of all, the single biggest complaint in offices, especially open office design, is noise.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no question that loud noises can actually be damaging to the ear and are stressful. And the interesting thing we found in our studies was when it's too quiet, it's actually stressful as well. There's a sweet spot of about 45 decibels where the stress response is lowest, or where we call the well-being response, again, measured using heart rate variability and other measures, is optimal. So, and one of the things about office spaces is it is easy to engineer office spaces with optimal acoustic quality. There are acoustical engineers who go in to design recording studios and concert halls, and they're part of the team from the beginning.
Yes.
I think, and I can't say for 100%, but I don't think many office spaces engage an acoustical engineer from the beginning, because every single material that is used in construction and design has an acoustical rating. So it is entirely possible to design a workspace with optimal acoustical quality to reduce that noise stress, and make people happier and more comfortable.
Yeah, I can fully underline this. In fact, it's sad to get the figures from Leaseman, which is doing the employee workspace satisfaction surveys globally. They've just revealed their 12th year of, I would say, ratings. And it's very sad to see that, although it's been stressed for all these years that acoustics is like job one in design, that the figures have gone barely up from, I think, 32% to 33% satisfaction on a scale of 100. So it's like, how do we have to repeat this? It's just, I have a feeling that sometimes designers design more for the eyes than for the ears. Unfortunately, the ears cannot be closed, right? Throughout the book, in the journey, you describe that measuring stress and resilience is not an obvious thing. And of course, I'm very curious about what kind of device or appliance I could use for that myself. Is it such that we are now at the position where consumers can decide to acquire these kind of devices even without medical intervention? What's the status of these measurement devices that people could consider now?
Well, so many of us are wearing wearable devices. I'm wearing a ring, and other people are wearing watches. And one of the problems with these wearable devices, and they're getting more every day, more and more features on it, is you can't necessarily tell your stress response in the moment. Some of them you can turn it on to see what your stress response is in the moment, but it doesn't tell you whether your stress response is elevated because you're moving more, because your boss yelled at you, or because there isn't enough light, or there's too much light or too much noise. So I don't think you can really figure that out for yourself by using these devices. But with the information that we gathered, we do have a prescription for a healthy well-being building. We know exactly the parameters, as I said, of noise level, decibel that's healthy. You can carry around a decibel. You can measure, if you're going to a loud coffee shop, that that's very loud, and that's going to be stressful, so you can leave. If your office space, and you can measure the decibel level, if it's consistently above 60 decibels, where it's getting to be really high stress level and actually harmful when it's 80 decibels. That's important, and you can advocate to your leadership that needs to be addressed. Same thing with temperature and humidity. We found that when the humidity is less than 30% or greater than 60%, the stress level, the stress response, the physiological stress response is 25% higher. That's a medically relevant range. And we think it's because, when it's too dry, the mucous membranes dry out, you're more susceptible to infections. What can you do about that? it's very expensive to humidify or dehumidify a whole building, but you can have a local desk humidifier right at your desk.
Yep.
I've seen people walk into spaces measuring carbon dioxide. You know, measure as we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the more people there are in a space, the longer they're in the space, and if the ventilation is poor, carbon dioxide accumulates. That impairs cognitive performance. It makes you sleepy, you make errors, and you don't even realize it. It impairs your judgment. So, you know, the optimal level of carbon dioxide in a space is really, 500 parts per million. That's outdoor space is 500, 400 parts per million. And if you see that your space is consistently above 900 parts per million, where your cognitive performance decreases to about 85%, if it's above 1,500 parts per million, where your cognitive performance decreases to 50%, then something needs to be done about that ventilation system. So, you can gather the data based on what we have found to advocate for a healthy well-being space.
We've been talking about prescriptions a number of times, and there's of course the prescriptions on the behavioral aspect, but then are there other like elements that we may not have covered up till now, where you're saying that's from a behavioral perspective an element that people need to take very serious as they go forward? We talked about sedentary. I mean, sedentary is one which is very important for me, because I've found that sitting too much is just not very good. So therefore, I have a feeling you're sitting, I'm standing, by the way. But so is that so dependent on the person, or what's your view on that?
No, it's certainly sitting is the new smoking. That that it's really bad for you. So you can remind yourself to get up and walk around every 20 minutes. Some people hate their devices because they don't like to be disturbed every 20 minutes. But again, if you have a sit-stand desk, that's helpful. Treadmill desk, but I find that really hard to do, be on a treadmill and work at the same time. But having spaces where you can go offline, walk around, walk in nature. Again, in the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine New Buildings, we have put in a desert garden with walkways around. There's a connection to a local park next door. And if the organization has the ability to reclaim some of the space around it and make it a green space, that will allow people to go offline for a moment and take micro meditation moments. And it's not that you're being lazy. Again, the C-suite has to realize constant work without a break does not enhance cognitive performance and creativity. Lack of sleep does not enhance creativity and productivity. So there has to be a recognition that it's important to go offline, take these walking breaks, be in nature, and have a chance to recharge.
Final point then, I mean, the subtitle of your book says creating well-being at work in any workplace, So we haven't really talked about the domestic environment, although we know that on balance, a lot of people will be spending sort of nearly half of their time going forward at home. That's a big question too, and employers are sort of reluctant, shall we say, to support, inspire that particular thing, because it might be a bit too much working from home. Where lies the accountability for guidance on this particular topic? Because let's face it, architects which are designing domestic residential places, which probably aren't blessed with the kind of education that typically designers and facilities managers have in large corporations, right?
Right. Well, I would turn to you. I mean, you're the expert in doing that. And I have to say, I admire what you've done so much for home spaces. And you really have intuitively incorporated all these features into a home space. And I talk about in the book, how can you do this? How can you create your workspace at your home to incorporate all 7 domains of integrative health? So there's no question that if your employer won't support you in that, you can certainly do a lot of things to support yourself.
Well, absolutely. I believe that as most of us will have to work liking or not, 50 years, and most probably across multiple employers, it is not helpful to wait for that one employer to inspire, direct, help you, and support you. And if you're serious about realizing your own potential as a professional, you've got to start working on that very much at the start of your career and maintain the focus on that.
Yes, I agree 100%.
Well, thanks ever so much, Esther, to join us for this wonderful chat. I mean, this is not a shortcut to not reading the book. I strongly advocate that people take it seriously. All the parts of it, in particular, the journey that led you up to this, where you had some personal experiences that also, I would say, pushed you forward. That may be a lot for people to digest, but I've always liked it to understand where people are coming from. It supports your cause and gives you the credibility for giving us the fine advice.
Well,
So
thank you.
for that.
It's been a great pleasure talking with you. Thanks.